December 20th, 1944, Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The snow was falling sideways, soft but relentless. It had already swallowed the road, the trees, and nearly every color except for white and gray. Private First Class Levi Kincaid crouched low behind a snow-covered ridge, pressing a small brass compass into his gloved palm. It was no military-issue instrument. It was round, light, and cheap. Something his aunt had handed him at a train station back in Maine. The kind of compass meant for a child's hiking trip, not a war. A week ago, the other men had called it useless. One sergeant had laughed out loud, saying it looked like something from a cereal box. That stupid toy, someone had said. But right now, that stupid toy was the only reason Levi knew where he was and where the enemy would be in less than 60 seconds. From somewhere down the road came the low, rolling thunder of tank engines, not the light American kind. These were heavier, deeper German Panzer engines, 2 of them, Levi guessed, maybe more behind. The sound shook the ground and tightened the breath in his chest. He glanced at the compass again. Made a grize just like he'd calculated. The bend in the road would force the first tank to show its left side. That's where the ambush would be. He closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw every step of these tup, the frozen dirt they had not been able to dig. The landmines placed shallow under snow, the fake jeep tracks meant to fool the Germans into thinking the road had been cleared. All of it resting on the exact angle he had measured with a toy. As the tanks grew closer, Levi took one slow breath and whispered just loud enough to hear himself. Let's see if it's still stupid now. The battle where time was the real weapon. Just 4 days earlier, on December 16, 1944, Adolf Hitler had launched his final major offensive on the Western Front. It was a gamble. One last desperate strike through the dense Ardennes forest aimed at splitting the Allied forces, capturing the port of Antwerp and forcing a negotiated peace. German High Command called it Wacht am Rhein, Operation Watch on the Rhine, but for the American soldiers caught in its path, it would soon become known as the Battle of the Bulge. The offensive struck where the Allies least expected, a quiet, snowy region manned mostly by green troops and units recovering from combat. Over 300,000 German soldiers surged forward, backed by more than 1,400 tanks and assault guns. Their goal was speed, shock, confusion. They needed to reach the Moose River before the Allies could react. But the Ardennes was not built for speed. The roads were narrow and winding. The forests were thick, the hills steep, and the December weather was brutal. Snowstorms grounded Allied air support for days, giving German columns time to move, but also slowing them down. Every intersection, every bridge, every curve in the road became critical terrain. The Germans could not afford delays. Hours mattered. That is what made Levi's position and his compass so important. He and a few dozen men were holding one of those critical bends in one of those narrow roads. If they could slow just one armored element for even half a day, they could buy time for American reinforcements to reposition. In battles like the Bulge, what happened in a frozen forest clearing could ripple through the entire war. Who was Levi Kincaid? Before the war, Levi Kincaid had never left the state of Maine. He grew up in a small mill town where winters came early and hung around until May. His father was a quiet man who worked with timber. His mother ran a diner that opened before dawn. Levi wasn't the loudest in a room. It didn't have to be. What he had was precision. As a teenager, Levi worked summers as a surveyor's assistant. While other kids chopped wood or hauled hay, Levi paced boundary lines in the woods with a notebook, a folding map, and a brass compass. His job was to know exactly where things were, not in a general sense, but in degrees and paces. Where one person saw trees, Levi saw angles, landmarks, patterns. He learned to trust bearings more than instinct, and he learned that small mistakes in direction could lead you miles off course. When he enlisted in the U.S. Army in early 1943, Levi wasn't assigned to a rifle squad. Instead, he was placed in a combat engineer company, the kind of unit that repaired roads, built bridges, and sometimes picked up a rifle when things got desperate. He was not flashy. He was not the fastest, but Levi had a gift for reading maps and finding paths others missed. His platoon sergeant called it compass voodoo. That compass, the one he carried in the Ardennes, wasn't regulation gear. It was a cheap brass toy his aunt had given him as a farewell gift. Something to keep you pointed home, she'd said, pressing it into his hand before he boarded the train at Bangor Station. It fit in his palm like a silver dollar, and the needle wobbled if you moved too fast. But Levi liked it not for its quality but for its simplicity. The other soldiers called it a toy. Some joked that he used it to find candy. One corporal asked if it came with a decoder ring. Levi didn't mind. Not really. He knew what they didn't. That in unfamiliar terrain under heavy cloud cover with no radio contact and no landmarks, that tiny wobbling needle was better than luck. In December of 1944, that compass would prove it. No tanks, no backup, no chance. By mid-December 1944, Levi Kincaid was attached to a composite engineer platoon supporting an infantry company from the 106th Infantry Division. It was their first major action. Their position, a frozen, tree-choked stretch of Belgium, was not supposed to be a hotspot. In fact, it had been chosen precisely because it was quiet, calm, a place to hold the line while other divisions prepared to move into Germany. But on December 16th, everything changed. The Germans hit hard and fast. Armor and infantry smashed through thin American defenses, taking advantage of surprise, poor visibility, and gaps in Allied coverage. Communication lines broke down. Units were cut off. Orders became rumors. In the chaos, Levi's platoon was told to hold a road junction near a narrow forest bend between two key towns, Ufalas and Basten. That road, unnamed, unpaved, and frozen solid, suddenly became valuable real estate. If the Germans took it, they could encircle American positions and drive deeper into Allied rear lines. If Levi and his men could delay them, even by a few hours, it could buy time for reinforcements to arrive. That was the mission, delay no matter the cost. But their equipment was limited. The platoon had one remaining anti-tank gun, a 57 mm1, light, mobile, but underpowered against heavier German armor like the Panther or the Tiger. They had two bazookas, both with limited ammunition, a few crates of anti-tank mines, some wire, and rifles. That was it. The German Panzer IV, the tank most likely to appear, weighed roughly 25 tons and carried a 75 mm main gun. Its armor was thickest at the front but vulnerable along the flanks. In theory, the American 57 mm gun could penetrate its side armor if fired from close range and at the right angle. In practice, that required nerve, timing, and an element of surprise. And they didn't have proper emplacements. The ground was frozen solid. You could not dig, only bury shallow charges and tried to conceal them with snow. The men were exhausted. Half had not slept in 24 hours. Their commanding officer, a young lieutenant named Parker, was fresh out of officer school. He was brave but inexperienced. He ordered a standard defense. Cover the road. Lay a few mines. Pray the Germans did not send tanks. Levy thought the plan was suicide. He walked the terrain alone using his compass and a paper map. He studied the curve in the road, the slope of the ground, the line of sight from the tree-line. He noted where a tank would have to slow, where the road narrowed, where Agan crew might have a clean shot at the side armor of a moving tank. He didn't see chaos. He saw geometry. When he returned to the platoon, he told the lieutenant he had a different idea, one that most men immediately dismissed as stupid. Levick Kincaid stood in front of the command tent with his snow-covered helmet under one arm and a half-folded map in his hand. He pointed at it, calm but firm. There's a bend in the road. 60 southwest from our position. If the Germans take that turn, their lead tank is to show its left side. No choice, that's our shot. Lieutenant Parker looked at the compass Levi was using. That same old brass circle with a scratched glass face. He frowned. You're basing this on that toy. Levi didn't flinch. I'm basing it on terrain. The compass just helps me prove it. A few of the men snorted. One private said, Captain Compass strikes again. Another muttered, this is going to be rich. Levi laid out his plan. He proposed positioning their only anti-tank gun, not directly on the road, but tuck it into a low ridge of snow and brush angled toward the bend. He had already measured the sight line. From that point, the gun crew would have a full 5-second window to fire into the side of the first tank before it cleared the curve. He suggested placing a few of their remaining mines beyond the bend, not to stop tanks but to shape their movement. If a tank commander saw menace or debris ahead, he might slow or shift, exposing even more of the side armor. Then came the bait. Levi wanted to stage false tire tracks and leave behind a burned-out Jeep chassis to make it look like Americans had just retreated, encouraging the Germans to roll forward quickly, maybe without dismounting infantry to scout. It was a trap built on assumption, on reading human behavior under pressure. Levi's key tool was that so-called stupid compass which he used to align every angle, every approach, every escape route. He plotted the gun's arc of fire down to the degree he cross-referenced with the map and verified against the terrain. To him, it was not complicated. It was geometry and timing. Lieutenant Parker scratched his head. "It's clever," he said. "But it's unorthodox," Levi replied. "So is fighting tanks with own gun and 2 bazookas." The sergeant smirked. "Well, if we're going to die, might as well die creatively." And so, with reluctant approval, Levy's plan was put into motion. The men joked about it the whole time. Stupid idea. Compass voodoo. Deadly math. But as they began moving snow, hauling the anti-tank gun into position, and laying the trap, the mood started to shift. It was not just crazy anymore. It was something to believe in. A snowy stage set for fire. The snow began falling harder that evening. Thick, wet flakes drifted through the forest like ash. The wind had dropped, but the cold had only grown sharper. Breath hung in the air like smoke. Even the trees stood still. Levitt checked his compass for the 4th time. He had marked the spot in his notebook, then rechecked it on the map, then walked it in the snow himself, pacing the arc between the ridge and the bend in the road, counting steps under his breath. D6 still perfect behind him. The crew struggled to manhandle the 57mm anti-tank gun into place. Its wheels groaned against frozen ruts. A blanket was thrown over their reach to stop it from icing. The sergeant muttered something about frostbite and cursed the lack of proper camouflage netting. Levi crouched next to the slope where they had carved out a shallow firing platform using shovels, bayonets, and bare hands. The ground was too frozen to dig properly, so they packed snow and brush for stability. Every minute felt stolen from the enemy. Down the road, the decoy was taking shape. They had dragged the burned-out Jeep chassis into position just past the curve. A few men stomped false tire tracks through the snow to make it look like Americans had retreated in a hurry. They hung shredded American canvas from a tree branch like a broken signal flag, just enough to be seen from a tank's perspective, but not close enough to inspect. The mine team worked silently. Without proper tools, they could not bury the explosives deep, so they covered them with snow and pine needles, carefully marking the edges with snap twigs, their own code. If the Germans slowed or hesitated near the mines, they would be exactly where Levi wanted them. The bazooka teams took position behind a thicket, watching the far end of the road. Their job was simple. Wait until the second tank tried to reverse or maneuver, then aim for the treads. Disable, not destroy. Stop the column cold. At midnight, Levi walked the whole setup one last time. The snow squeaked under his boots. The sky was the color of iron. Visibility was down to 30 FT in places, perfect for concealment, terrible for nerves. He returned to his post and sat behind the gun crew. He reached into his coat and pulled out the compass. The glass was fogged. He wiped it clean with his sleeve and stared at the needle as it wobbled and then steadied. Someone whispered behind him, still trusting that toy. Levi didn't answer. He didn't have to. There was a silence, the kind that stretches thin and wide like a taut wire before it snaps. And then far off in the trees came the sound they had all been waiting for, a deep, distant grinding metal against frozen earth like thunder wrapped in chains. Tank engines. They were coming. Then Levi dropped his hand. The world had narrowed to sound, not sight, not movement, just sound. And that sound was deep and grinding, like 2 steel beasts dragging chains through a frozen tunnel. At first it had been distant, muffled by trees and snow. But now every man on Levi's gun crew could feel it in their bones. The tanks were coming. Not in theory, not in some vague patrol warning. They were real. They were closing in. Levi Kincaid lay flat behind the 57mm gun, the metal cold against his cheek. The barrel pointed toward the bend in the road, its recoil mechanism trembling slightly from the cold. Beside him, the loader clutched a shell tight against his chest, knuckles white through frost-covered gloves. No one spoke. Somewhere behind them, the bazooka team was in place, hidden behind a thicket offer trees. The anti-tank mines were covered, the snow smoothed carefully over them. The decoy jeep sat just around the curve, half buried and scorched, as if recently abandoned, and Levi was holding a compass. He had no reason to check it again. He had checked it 12 times that day and 3 more times in the last hour. He knew the bearing by heart. Heading southwest. That was the angle of the road as it curved left, forcing any approaching vehicle to expose its flank for 5 or 6 critical seconds. The kill zone, the ambush site. But still, he glanced down at the brass disc in his hand. The needle bounced once, then settled. The reading was unchanged, then he heard it. The first tank, it was not subtle. The sound of a Panzer engine was unmistakable. A deep growling roar with a whine on top like a beast fighting its own weight. Levi recognized it from training briefings. The Panzer IV medium-class 75-meter gun around 25 tons. He imagined the driver squinting through the slit window, following the narrow road through snow and mist, and then he saw it. Just a shape at first, large gray solid emerging from the fog. The snow swirled around it, clinging to the sides, blurring its edges like a ghost. But it was no ghost. It was steel, painted in camouflage, marked with black crosses. It moved slowly, deliberately, and behind it came another 2 tanks, just like Levi predicted. His throat tightened, his fingers flexed involuntarily. He glanced over at the sergeant, who nodded once and mouthed, "Wait." The lad tank rolled toward the bend as it began to curve left. Its entire left flank tilted outward, almost in slow motion, turning into full view of Levi's position. Levi held his breath. This was the moment he had mapped out. The geometry was playing out exactly as planned. But it was not just geometry now. It was real men in that tank. A real gun pointed at nothing. Yet the turret wasn't even rotating. The German commander, visible through the open hatch, was scanning ahead with binoculars. He saw the burned-out Jeep, the fake tracks, the broken American tarp hanging from a tree branch. All of it part of Levi's bait. No dismount, no scouting team, no hesitation. They were falling for it. Behind the lead tank, the second vehicle crawled forward, still on the straight part of the road, not yet in the trap. That would be the bazooka team's job, to catch it in retreat. The lead tank's side armor was now fully exposed. Levi raised his left hand. It hovered in the air for 2 long seconds. The loader whispered, "Ready." The gunner's finger tightened on the trigger. "Say when," he mouthed. But Levi didn't drop his hand yet. He waited a second more. 2. He watched the treads, watched the spacing, calculated not just the angle, but the emotional rhythm of the moment. The German crew believed the road ahead was clear. They were not expecting a fight. If Levi waited too long, they'd be through the bend. The flank would vanish, the opportunity gone. If he shot too early, the round might hit at a bad angle and bounce off. The road belonged to him, but only for a second. Then he dropped his hand. The shot ripped the silence in half. The 57 mm recoiled violently, the noise echoing off the frozen trees like a thunderclap. The shell screamed forward, arcing through the mist, and slammed into the Panzer's side, low near the engine deck. A flash, a burst of sparks, a screech of twisting metal. The tank shuddered. Steam erupted from the rear vents. The turret jerked violently, swinging toward the treine, but too late. One track ground to a halt, while the other kept turning, spinning, the tank sideways across the road. It was disabled. Inside the forest, the men stayed frozen. The trap had been sprung, but the danger wasn't over. The second tank revved, gears grinding as the driver tried to reverse. Snow kicked up in ablast. That was the signal the bazooka team had waited for. A soft thump, then a whoosh, then a sudden metallic crack. The second tank lurched, one tread seared off at the front. It was stuck, spinning uselessly on one side. In less than 10 seconds, 2 German tanks had been stopped cold, all by a compass, a bend in the road, and a man who refused to be laughed off. Fire, surrender, and the power of restraint. The forest was no longer silent. It screamed. The first Panzer was half spun across the road, smoke pouring from its side. Its crew scrambled inside, yelling in clipped German. The turret jerked again, trying to find the hidden enemy. But the gunner couldn't draw a bead on the source. Their line of sight was too tight. Their angle was wrong. Then came the second American shot. The 57 mm fired again, this time aiming higher. The round struck just below the turret, punching a jagged crater into the armor plating. The tank rocked as if slapped by agent. Something inside exploded. Not the ammo, not yet, but something important. The hatches flew open. The German commander bailed out first, tumbling into the snow. He crawled with one arm clutching his ribs. Another crewman climbed after him. Helmet gone, eyes wide with smoke and fear. Levi shouted, "Hold fire!" The loader was already reaching for a third shell, but Levi stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. Their bailing saved the round. Just then, a burst of machine gun fire erupted from behind the German tank. The second vehicle, the one hit by the bazooka, was still active. Its gunner had swung his turret and opened fire toward the treine, wildly spraying into the woods. Snow and bark exploded around the American position. Levi ducked behind the gun. One round pinged off the shield close enough to send hot metal across his cheek. The bazooka team answered with a second rocket. This one struck the engine deck, and with it came fire. Real fire. The tank lit from the rear, flames licking across the exhaust vents. Within moments, the turret hatch popped, and another German crewman leapt clear, his jacket aflame. He rolled in the snow, shrieking. The men around Levi watched, eyes wide. Some were already climbing out of their positions, weapons raised, ready to mop up what was left. The sergeant barked, "Don't break, cover, not yet." But Levi was already moving. He broke from his post and moved down the embankment, careful not to step where mines had been placed. He waved his arms. "Stop, they're done." One of the Germans, the tank commander from the first vehicle, was on his knees in the snow. His right glove was missing. His face was pale and bruised. Slowly, shakily, he raised both arms above his head. He was surrendering. One of the American privates, a 19-year-old from Missouri named Dale, had his rifle up, finger on the trigger, breathing fast. His best friend had died in the Siegfried line. He was shaking with rage. "He got him." Levi grabbed the barrel off Dale's rifle and pushed it down. "No." But Nomer Levi turned to the German, now holding his arms even higher, trembling. His lips moved, not a prayer but words in broken English. "Oh shoot, it's been done, please." Levi stared at him. He could see the man's age now. No more than 22, maybe 23. A boy in a different uniform. For a moment, the forest went quiet again. The flames hissed. The snow fell, and Levi did nothing. He didn't call for backup. He didn't search the prisoner. He just stood there looking at a man who'd moments ago been the enemy. Steel and gunpowder and fire now reduced to smoke, frost, and breath. The war had paused. Behind him, the other Americans slowly emerged. One carried a rope, another carried bandages. The second tank crew was pulled from the wreck. 2 hour alive, one was not. Levi never found out their names. What he remembered years later was the look on that tank commander's face. The disbelief, the exhaustion, the raw, naked fear. It was the look of someone who had expected death and received silence. That moment, that restraint was not part of the plan. It was not drawn on a map. It was not aligned with a compass. But it may have been the most precise decision Levi made that day. No more jokes, only respect. By sunrise, the smell of burning oil had settled into the snow. The 2 German tanks sat crooked on the road, blackened and steaming, their metal hulls slowly frosting over as the cold reclaimed them. The wrecks blocked the entire lane, front and back, like 2 dead animals stretched across a narrow mountain pass. Nothing was getting through. Levi stood on the ridge, holding the compass in his hand like it weighed more than a rifle. His gloves were soaked. His lips were cracked from the wind. He hadn't spoken much since the surrender. No one had. The adrenaline had drained away, leaving silence. The kind that only comes after you realize you're still alive. The sergeant finally broke it. "Well, Compass," he muttered, "I think your stupid idea just bought us a hell of a lot of time." He was right. The narrow road they'd defended, unremarkable just 2 days earlier, had become a critical link in the German advance. According to captured maps and intelligence reports gathered later, the enemy had planned to use that path to funnel a support element westward toward Bastonia, linking with armor from the 5th Panzer Army. But now the road was shut completely. It would take at least 6 hours to clear the tanks, longer if engineers couldn't be spared. The next viable detour was a winding mountain route to the north, already jammed with supply trucks and fuel convoys. German doctrine depended on fast armor, shock and movement. Timing was everything. This delay cracked it. In war, momentum is a weapon, and what Levy had done with 1 gun, 1 compass, and a handful of half-frozen men was break that momentum at the knees. Reports came in by radio from another unit half a mile west. A different American squad had used landmines and trees to trap a column of German half-tracks, delaying them another 3 hours, somewhere else. Paratroopers from the 101st Airborne had held a crossroads longer than expected. Together, the Cédulays stacked, hours turning into a day becoming enough time for reinforcements to arrive. The German plan had depended on crossing the Meuse River by day 4. It was now day 5. They were behind in the chaos of the Ardennes. With poor visibility and frozen communications, these small moments rarely made the front pages. No headlines would ever read. Private Compass stopped a Panzer. There were no medals handed out that morning, just sore backs and stiff fingers and smoke in everyone's clothes. But in the operations log of the division's rear headquarters, one line was typed by a junior officer that afternoon. Enemy armor delayed at road junction. Whiskey 12. Status impassable. Fire damage confirmed. Friendly engineers en route. That was it. Just own sentence. But it told the whole story, because while thousands fought across miles of forest, this was how the tide turned. Not just with sweeping maneuvers, but with stubborn men refusing to run, with ambushes no one saw coming, with compass needles pointing to a narrow bend in a nameless road, and that road would never be used by the enemy again. The night after the ambush, the men built a fire not for warmth but for light. The air was too bitter for comfort. They huddled around it anyway, helmets off, shoulders slumped, boots steaming in the snow. No one said much at first. Then someone passed Levi a can of peaches. That mattered. Rations were sacred out there, especially fruit. A man didn't give up a can of peaches unless it meant something. Levi didn't say thank you. He just nodded. That was enough. One by one, the jokes stopped. No more Captain Compass. No more stupid toy. Now it was, hey Levi, check the map for me. Or, is this ridge due east, you think? His name started showing up in conversations differently, not as a punchline, but as a reference, as the guy who had called it, who had known where to dig, where to point, when to wait. It was not hero worship. No one in that platoon thought of themselves Asheros. They were cold, tired, under-equipped, and outnumbered. But in the field, respect is a currency, and Levi's pocket was suddenly full of it. Even Lieutenant Parker pulled him aside the next morning. The young officer was red-eyed, his hands shaking from caffeine and stress. He didn't apologize, but he spoke with a slower tone. You bought USA window, he said, and a clean shot. Then he handed Levi a folded piece of paper, a copy of the handwritten action report being sent up the chain. Levi's name was in it. His compass was not. But Levi didn't care. The respect didn't just come from what he had done. It came from how he had done it. No boasting. No, I told you so. Just quiet work, careful planning, nerve under pressure, and when the shot came, he took it. Clean, controlled. In a war filled with chaos, that kind of clarity was rare. It drew people in. It made them listen. Levi still kept the compass tucked inside the inner pocket of his coat. He didn't flash it around. Didn't say, see? But more than once, another man would glance at it when Levi pulled out his map. And not one of them laughed because they all knew now that stupid idea had saved all of them. Tiny decisions, massive consequences. The Battle of the Bulge would last 6 brutal weeks. Over 89,000 American casualties. More than 800 tanks lost. Hundreds of square miles of forest fought over inch by inch, tree by tree. It was the largest and bloodiest battle the United States would fight in World War II. And it turned not all at once, but in pieces. By late December, the German advance had already begun to stall. Not because of one massive defeat, but because of dozens, maybe hundreds of small delays. Frozen bridges blown before tanks could cross. Roadblocks that held half a day longer than they were supposed to. A few men with a single anti-tank gun forcing an armored column to detour. Levi's ambush was one of those delays. The blocked road near Huffley's created a chain reaction. The 5th Panzer Army, already low on fuel and pressed for time, had tore route a key supporting element through a narrower mountain path. That path became congested. Fuel trucks got stuck. Artillery support fell behind. The time it broke, and once the Germans lost momentum, they never regained it. American reinforcements, led in part by General Patton's 3rd Army, broke through snow and chaos to relieve Bastonia. Air support returned when the skies cleared, and by early January the Germans were retreating, their hopes of reaching Antwerp in ruins. Historians often focus on the grand sweep of war, divisions, maps, arrows on charts. But what they sometimes forget is that those arrows bend around moments like Levis's because tanks cannot move through trees. Roads cannot be rebuilt in a night. And even the strongest offensive will choke if you steal its time. That's what Leva did. He didn't destroy a German army. He didn't take a hill or plant a flag. Had just pointed a compass at a bend in a road, waited for a tank to show its side, and fired. And that made the difference between a Panzer moving forward and a Panzer burning in the snow. In the end, Levi never called himself a hero. After the war, he went back to Maine quietly. He worked in land management, married once, had no children, kept the compass in a drawer beside his bed until the day he died. It was scratched, slightly bent, and still worked. He never told many people the full story, not out of shame, but because for men like Levi, surviving was enough. The ones who talked the loudest usually hadn't seen the worst of it. Platoon things stayed with him. Not the gunfire, not even the fire, but that moment in the snow when the German soldier dropped to his knees and raised his hands. The split second when Levi could have pulled the trigger but didn't. That was the choice he remembered most. Because war is not just about who shoots first. It's about who thinks clearly in themament between fear and instinct. And sometimes the most powerful weapon on the battlefield is not the rifle. It's restraint. It's reason. It's the refusalto become what you're fighting against. That's what makes Levi's story matter. Not just because his compass stopped tanks, but because it pointed somewhere deeper. Toward dignity, toward discipline, toward the belief that doing something small and right can ripple outward into something large and lasting. So, here's the question I want to leave you with. If you were Levi, cold, exhausted, outnumbered, and everyone laughed at your plan, would you still trust your stupid idea? Or maybe the better question is this. What have you carried in your life that others called foolish but turned out to be the thing that saved you? Let us know in the comments below. And if Levi's story moved you, if it made you see World War II not just as history but as humanity, then share it. Because stories like his ain't just about the past. They're a compass for the future.